Well, welcome everybody to the Great Witness, Kevin the Great Witness show. The new adventure series is. We're here with Kevin, of course, and I'm Dean Bell, and Nakai is here with us today too, to share with the experiences that Kevin is having. He's going to share with us, and we're going to comment and ask questions. And welcome, Kevin, for another round.
This real side experience would begin at a kind of campsite. A fairly large gathering of people were present, and my impression was that they were those on their respective awareness processes. I didn't recognize any of the individuals, though of course my real awareness would know who they were, having the overview of creation and all experiential occurrences of its created personal self and its simulation as it has. Perhaps my personal self would have recognized more of those present, but seems I wasn't drawn to determine this particular detail. There was one individual I did recognize, however, and that was Pierce. We were looking to the skies above our camping area, and there suspended above us would be the moon, as it was a night-time setting. A curious thing then began to occur, for as we watched, the moon began to crack, to fragment, fissures began to form and zigzag across its surface, and it proceeded to disintegrate before our eyes. This didn't seem to be a cause of concern for anyone here, as though it was expected. As the moon continued to disintegrate, as the fragments began to vanish, we could determine something else that lurked behind it, and finally, when the moon was completely absent from the skies, what was positioned in the space it had occupied was a planet. Interestingly, the planet was exactly the same size as the moon, that the moon had exactly eclipsed it, in the same way as the moon can precisely eclipse the sun when it does, suggesting the planet behind it was either in the exact same position as the moon and the same size, or more likely, as with the sun and moon eclipsing phenomena, the planet was far larger and at the exact position, distance-wise, and behind the moon, that it was perfectly eclipsed. This planet then would start to diminish in size, because it was withdrawing backwards from the position it was and spinning off into space to some other position, and we watched it become smaller and smaller until it was a pinprick of light, and then that winked out also. I'm uncertain if this planet still remained in this creational simulator, but as I understand it, that seemed to be the idea, for it to be a safe haven for the sincere, real intented, as another option available for if conditions continue to deteriorate on the earth, or even if situations stabilize and agreements are such that the dire fate of the planet Earth can be turned around, this planet still represents a place of sanctitude for those still sharing and presenting in creation. As on a few real side future view experiences I've shared, many new friends continue to operate on Earth, with others basing themselves on other planets and travelling between Earth and these other planets to carry out and conduct their promoting and sharing a business. So maybe the planet in this experience can relocate its position according to what is required. Maybe it can literally act like a spacecraft and transport Dwayne and others into other star systems and areas of space for engagements with other beings, aliens, and their home planets. My impression was that no one present was perturbed at this planet removing itself from sight either, so perhaps this was indeed the case, that it wasn't exiting this simulator, but only relocating somewhere else temporarily, and that we were carrying out all is promoting assignments on the Earth still. It was interesting how the moon was destroyed, for the moon is part of the reptilian control system. It rather is, in fact, a hollowed-out space station, and is utilized to broadcast subliminal frequencies onto the Earth that further subconsciously control, through agreements implanted, all the masses of humanity. As I understand it, the moon receives these distorted subliminal signals from Saturn, then amplifies them and beams them onto the Earth. The absence of the moon, we are told, will cause severe disruptions and geological turmoil. But then, as ancient history reveals, there was a time in human history where there was no moon, and even many indigenous peoples, who still have retained this knowledge, passed down through the ages, say how reptilians trundled the moon across the universe and parked it in Earth's orbit. It's possible the moon's absence will have no adverse effects, for what we have been told regarding these alarming possibilities are from the less than credible sources of information that are the mouths of the controlling scientific systems. So perhaps in this real side experience it revealed a future view of another planet now revealed in the skies for all to see, and also that perhaps it had in some way destroyed the moon. Perhaps the pure frequencies of the vibrations of the ears literally fragments distortion, just like the NUUU song repels all individuals of ill intent, as they simply can't stand in the purity of a sound that is at odds with their decided position in life. And with a planet being an expression of this true light reality, nothing of a creational distortion can exist in its proximity, suggesting then The possibility of this future view, revealing the taking down of the dark forces controlling infrastructure, of which the moon, with its broadcasting distorted frequencies, is a part of. There seemed to follow no cataclysmic situations after the moon was destroyed, so perhaps this confirms also that the moon's absence will not be a cause for concern. What followed was a series of scenes where I was travelling through the streets of the earth. Wherever on the planet this might have been, Pierce was in the car with me, along with several others. We seemed to be transitioning between the 1800s and the modern era, whatever the date of the modern era may have been for this future view, as though we were conducting some business that required that we access this 1800s period, perhaps as the controller's infrastructure does unravel and continue to do so. Perhaps a little time frame tidying up is required, as the dark forces have installed slowly throughout human history the infrastructure that will eventually fully lock the humans into a completely controlled situation where even free will thought and decision making is managed through the technology and by the controller's design. For the moon, by all accounts, made its presence known many hundreds of thousands of years ago, so who knows what other devious technologies and constructs the dark forces have put in place throughout the ages. Perhaps it was necessary then to go to the period in the 1800s and dismantle something there. Everything is here and now, and any point or time frame in creation can be accessed through the real awareness. So it's not so much that we travelled in time, but more accessed another dimension through our real awareness, where certain ideas were created and agreed upon that required dismantling, and I was just provided the impression of the 1800s era that was applied to that particular dimension. Also, we would stop the car at a certain point, and there crawling around on the ground were alligators and crocodiles, but their size was so diminutive as to present very little by way of concern. My impressions were that they represented the reptilians, those still clinging on to their attitudes, reluctant to let go of their need to want to control and destroy others, even as it seemed their entire human control operation and infrastructure was being taken down, suggesting then that agreement overall was to the removal of human control, and even that the overall reptilian species agreed also to such. The real side, always revealing what is being overall decided in the moment we are afforded the view. Everything is revealed on the real side, as it is decided in every new moment. It just takes cause and effect sequences of a played-out experience to reach the culmination of what is being decided on the physical, but agreements can waver and fluctuate, and so the future views on the real side can change also in accordance. But this seemed promising at any rate, and indeed, real side future view experiences of late have been leaning toward a more beneficial awareness-wise outcome. Usually, size denotes awareness, or personal self-importance. Dwayne, as an example, will represent his awareness as being gigantic in size on the real side, and the reptilians will represent their self-convinced importance by bloating up their size also, the difference discernible through the real awareness. Both examples are of large size, but only those vast in stature through awareness will have that sense of real intent and is standing essence about them, that the reptilians and those that bloat themselves up through their personal considerations of themselves will lack. In this case, why the reptilians represented by alligators were so tiny could be a combination of both, lacking awareness, and that they were also somewhat personal self-deflated as their agendas and schemes were falling to ashes around them, despite they still clinging onto their want to control, and that they were so small, representing how they in fact posed no threat, were no longer a danger to anybody, as it was only agreement to them and their controlling ideas that they had creational power. Retract it, and they are nothing. But they only are nothing, and of no relevance, if they decide to be. They could just as readily decide to become more aware at any moment. The opportunity of recognizing the true reality is available for all, regardless of what anyone has decided previously. Every moment is new, after all, and in one new moment we can turn everything around for ourselves if we but decide and have the intent to do so. There was a continuation also of the scenes in the camping site. These were various and perhaps not so vital to share, although interestingly there was one character who seemed rather abrasive in his attitudes. I had no impression as to who he was. He was an older-looking man, perhaps in his 70s, but he did feature on the campsite and amidst then the aware people. He seemed to have the ability to shape-shift his form, and into that of a kind of large, four-legged cat, and should anyone touch his fur, or indeed if he brushed up against anyone, as he seemed to be inclined to do, being rather aggressive as he was, the recipient would receive almost as though an electric shock that would continue until a contact was broken between the feline and whoever he was in contact with. At one point, I had an argument with this individual, and he would transform into this cat and press against me, that I would experience this electrocuting sensation, like being engulfed in a million stabbing needles all over the body. Of course, everyone has their personal selves, and there will always be a little drama and situations between the personal selves of those on their awareness processes. Everyone will have their occasional attitudes. It's just a case of not overly choosing and embracing the attitudes of the personal self over the being-isness nowness of the real awareness. Or effectively, you are choosing the personal self and putting it before the whole of life. The whole of life, which is your real awareness. And as such, you're not going to get very far with your process that must eventually mean the letting go of the personal self entirely. If you cling on to your attitudes, you are deciding to remain in the effects of them, which can only be experienced in creation. Also on the campsite, at one point, I would be taking a nap, and into my tent would wander a young boy, around the age of 10, I would say. He proclaimed that he had a skill whereby he could enhance anyone's ability to be a great witnesses on the real side, to see more and more effectively bring back what was seen to the physical, personal self on waking. Intrigued, I would agree, and the boy proceeded to place me in a trance-like state. However, during this procedure, and the idea was that the personal self would be practically unconscious and oblivious throughout, the boy proceeded to rummage through my possessions. For my personal self was in a trance, but my real awareness afforded me the view of what was taking place, even as my eyes were shut, and my personal self in a trance, and my impressions through the real awareness were that this boy had no skill other than being able to put you in such a trance. He could not facilitate a greater real side experience ability, and indeed it was a means by which he could plunder your possessions. Generally, the real side experiences are always taking place. As life is always on, everything is, and in that isness everything is every experience ever that is available in the isness of our real awareness. It just depends on what of the everything that is, in regards to experience, the personal self is shown, and there are various reasons for the extent of what we see or not through the personal self. Everything from decision, intent, to the presence and strength of the sensor. It's possible that individuals can make adjustments that assist in real side experience receiving. The real guides can adjust the sensor of individuals, for example, if they deem it appropriate and beneficial to do so, and if they, of course, have a free will agreement from the individual. But when it comes to these real side experiences, generally it's based on our decision to want to see them, the intent to have them and bring them back to the physical. So, in theory, an individual could make adjustments to our sensor, of even enhancing the ability and effectiveness of our memory body to retain experiences, but we would have to, of course, extend to them agreement, which I did here with this boy. But realizing his deception, I awoke immediately from my trance. He bolted from the tent, and later I would confront his parent, his father, and explain to him what his child had been doing. This would be another example of applying a caution where the extending of agreements to others is concerned, for we may not be agreeing with what we thought that we were, and as such we can open ourselves up to all manner of experiences we rather would have avoided. Always we must determine the intent of those we extend agreement to, and perhaps, due to the seeming innocence of a boy so young, this personal self-conviction that he must be sincere by virtue of his age overshadowed my real awareness discernment, a discernment made possible only if we stand indifferent to the situations and the personal self-ideas about them. The moment we make assumptions and have our convictions as anything other than just this being isness state must be the personal self, we have moved from the real awareness indifference and objectivity, where intent can be determined, into the personal self that obscures our real awareness reading of the situation. The father was most aghast. Evidently, he had no idea this had been occurring, and would ensure me that he would speak to his child and return all stolen items to anyone else his boy had put into a trance and pilfered from. The experience would end there, and perhaps it indicates that as a people do become more aware, so they unlock these abilities through the personal self, maybe accessing greater ethereal skills, everything from potential shape-shifting to trance-inducing. All too tempting then for individuals to utilize such in ways that don't make sense with life and are not awareness supporting, and the use of the psychic sciences, like any other vehicle of the personal self, will have the effects that follow. Far better, then, to only use the vehicles as required for our process of awareness, and not to use them for personal, self-serving reasons. A little like how Jesus, for example, got himself rather in trouble with the lords of karma through his unnecessary use of the psychic sciences, and subjected himself to many more lifetimes in creation consequently, whereas he was only to present the ears at that time, and had he done just that, maybe he would be a real guide too by now. Duane, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "It's a verification of what's taking place. It's all about awareness. People have their literal ideas, but that's not it. Everybody who wants to be a part of this should always focus on better recognizing the ears, being sincere, very important."
Going back to the beginning, the moon and the Saturn, yes, I've heard that Saturn is the station that sends out subliminals, and the moon is a relay station, so to speak, and it broadcasts all these things that we don't really notice, but it just impresses on people's minds certain things that they want. And we talked about, the moon maybe being not here in the past. It reminded me of Dwayne talking about that used to be no darkness here, but it's the agreement of people, their subconscious agreement, particularly, that it's creating darkness at night. It could be a lot different. It could be light all the time. Like on the real side, with the guides they don't sleep or eat. They're on 24/7, just like life, doing things. We just have this notion that, and rightfully, until we understand better, that we need to sleep and eat here. But Nikaya here mentioned the breatharians and how they got through that. The Tartarians were breatharians. They lived without food. Okay, and then it also reminded me of the apocalyptic movies that are out there. They never really show, they show the public in distress and at each other. They never show the underground tunnels and the elites really getting it. It's always the public that are the recipients of this apocalypse. Very few, if any, that I recall, the movies, which are documentaries in a way, show that the bad guys get it, or the bad guys are caught. Even the governments are like, like the US government under attack, the White House in some of these movies, and somebody comes to save the government, which is supposedly the good guys, whereas in fact they're creating this mess that we're in. They're helping to create it. So it's just interesting how we don't really see. They talk about the bad guys getting caught, but they never really address the real bad guys behind it. Another thing, the child part too, the indigo kids coming in, they could also have these abilities, but also have free will and decision to do something, that would not be of a benefit to people. But they have the ability to, like, and the talent and the skills to deceive people, like in your experience there. So there's a new generation, that they call it the indigo kids, and new generation coming in. So they see more, but also with that, they need to decide, to do something good for everybody. Nikaya, do you have something to share?
Yeah, well, you were talking the story. Had a strange experience. It was as if I was in more than one dimension at the same time, and finally decided, okay, I'll just go with it. So odd. Yeah. Yeah, at first I thought, oh, I think I'm losing my mind. What's going on here? I am used to being tapped into one part of space and time as the real reality, but in this particular experience, there were several realities, several space and time experiences happening at once. And I was pretty well caught up in it until I started talking about it. And it's interesting how it's right outside of my awareness as I'm talking about it. And I did find it a little frightening too, like what is going on? I'm losing my grip on reality, but anyway, then I just settled down and experienced it and allowed it to have its experience with me. And I'm not quite sure how this is all gonna pan out or if I'm even gonna remember it again. Like I said, as soon as I started talking about it, it started to move away from me. Maybe something you say or your friend says, Kevin says, maybe that'll bring it back again. Well, I found myself outside of space and time, and it felt more real than this place. And it was odd because as soon as I started to talk about it, it kept receding so that I couldn't really grasp it. Yeah, I don't, maybe your friend will remember what I said because it's like, wow, where was I and how did this happen? I was like in an interdimensional space and I didn't quite.
While Kevin was talking, or was before that?
Yeah, while he was talking.
Okay. Well, that happens. So, welcome back.
Oh, thanks.
We're all over. Our awareness is all over the place. So you're just accessing different parts of it.
Yeah, that was really unusual.
Well, stick around. There's a lot more.
Oh, okay. Haha.
And sometimes Dwayne goes through experiences, even though he knows that there's some kind of distortion to it. He still goes through sometimes these experiences just for the experience itself and just to see what's with it, just to have experience.
Oh.
Through a lot of things with the bonds where he knows there may be crooked or not the real deal, but he goes through it just to see how he can maneuver things and how he can, just to have that experience behind him. So next time he goes through something, he'll know better.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe you can ask Kevin what I said because I don't remember. It's like I'm moving further and further away from it as time goes on. I'm like, wow, what happened there? I was fully awake and yet I wasn't on this dimension.
Anything, Kevin? I mean, I know you, Kevin, you're in the between state. You talk about that a lot. The in-between state, you call it.
As I was saying in the experience that I shared, I mean, everything that there is available for us to view in the nowness of our real awareness. So it's just a case of where we position our awareness as to what we see, and then obviously the personal self will only be shown so much because it can only deal with so much information, scenes and situations at one time. So I've had a number of experiences where sometimes I've been overwhelmed and bombarded with a lot of imagery, almost the equivalent of having thousands of movies on at the same time, and then but evidently in those situations, because it is being shown in that way, it is obviously then not necessary that I see see all those imageries. Otherwise, if it was important that I see them, it would have been slowed down, and I would have been allowed to have a more clearer view through my personal self. So a lot of times we're going through a lot of imagery. The imagery is almost like a side effect of the experience we're going through. We have decided a certain thing, and we're going through a process, whatever that may be. I mean, it may even be something along the lines of tap line. We're moving, and then we see a lot of the imagery that is associated with the agreements and attachments that cause the tap lines to be so. And so the imagery is almost like a side product of that process, and so not necessarily so that we need to see the imagery. And also as well, what is somewhat time is sort of the essence with the simulator being as it is. The process is vastly sped up, so the guides will move us through the process as quickly as we can, not too quickly that we miss what we need to be shown, but quickly enough that sometimes it can be a little overwhelming for the personal self. But the real awareness can see everything that's going on, and is becoming more so aware of the true reality through all that we are going through in our process. And as Val was saying, you don't necessarily have to go onto the real side, have what people call dreams, in order to experience the multi-dimensional parts of ourselves or the rest of the simulator. Everything is available here and now. It's just a case of if people are able to move their view and access that everything that is available sort of in this nowness of the is. And for me, as Val was saying, what I do a lot of times before bed is I retain a state of awareness, which I call the in-between state, whereas it's at a point where you need to be in order to go to sleep, where you put the consciousness of the mind and emotions aside. And then at that point, you're about ready to go onto the real side and have what people call their dreams. But instead of going there, I will remain in that state of being on the verge where I could go to sleep and go onto the real side, but not quite. And I retain this place with my consciousness aside, that then has a lot of phenomena bleeding over from the real side onto the physical level. And so if you are in what they call waking reality on the physical level, and you are experiencing as though you are on the real side, then evidently you put yourself in a position where you're accessing that as you would if you were on the real side, without putting your physical body to sleep. And so it would be very similar to what Val's described there as the between state. And so it would be something along those lines. You just shifted your view, your awareness from that which you usually have, which is on the physical level, where you simply see the simulation as it processes through your consciousness, and instead you move your awareness beyond the consciousness, and then we're accessing more of the dimensions of yourself and the rest of the simulator. And it could just be a random series of situations or scenes that you saw, or it could be something that you perhaps subconsciously decided to see but didn't realize consciously that you were setting in motion. So it's something along those lines.
That sounds like it could be weird.
Well, you get routine in the process that you see working for you, how it works for you. For me, I don't have a lot of real side experiences, but I get impressions, and I go with it. And it seems to work. Whatever I'm doing seems to work in terms of becoming more aware. Although traditionally I'm not like Kevin. I don't have these experiences that I bring back. But yet, through my impressions, being open, I seem to I seem to see the shift, or the viewpoint, shift, being able to shift around, like Paul called it, like exercising a muscle. You're shifting your viewpoints around, and you get get to know what it is, or how you do it yourself uniquely. The shifting. soul travel, we call. It's like shifting around, but in this meantime, you're doing it for a purpose, to become more aware in your real awareness. So these are just like different methods. Kevin has his, I have mine. The next person, that you have yours, but it's all to become more aware, whatever it is, whatever you use. And it could be an endless assortment of things you use. And look at the people, the saints and the saviors in the past. They, you know, whether it's in the cave meditating or something, whatever they used, you know. Now it's different because we can't sit in a cave and, you know, spend that time. We're kind of on a timeline here. So it's speeded up, like Kevin said. But find your, you know, find what is working for you in terms of becoming more aware, and then utilize it, kind of routine it, you know, so you don't have to think about it anymore, and just utilize it. It's like a tool. And then you can move past yourself. You've got the routine, but then, you know, constantly move past yourself into more unknown territory. Always challenge yourself. Dwayne talks about challenging himself. He likes to scare himself, you know, do something that scares you. Don't be reckless, but do something that, you know, extends your awareness, or potentially it does, by doing something that's maybe, you know, outside your comfort zone. And that will constantly extend your awareness by doing that, because it'll be a new experience. Because we already know what we know. That's just a given, you know, our usual routines. But get into the routine of becoming more aware through whatever process you do. Even what you just did here, you can kind of zone out. When Kevin does his next experience, zone out or something, you know, like get in that zone again and see if you can repeat it, you know, that experience, the in-between zone or whatever it was, you know, just for fun.
Yeah.
And then you can consciously do it, maybe, you know, if you're on a bus or something, not while you're driving, but maybe on a bus, on a spaceship or something, you can get in that zone again. Explore it.
Yeah, I had this image of being upside down in outer space when you were talking.
Okay.
Yeah, like we outside the spaceship, upside down. That's that's very unusual. That's not your usual space. What the heck?
Well, Dwayne says when you have an inkling, go with it. You know, when you get some intuitive nudge, always go with it. For me, just go with it, no matter how it seems. With the rational mind, just go with it. It always turns out. If you sincerely want to wake up and become more aware, it works out. It's a facility people don't use very much. Well, most people don't use their intuition that much.
Wow.
They're doing the literal thing all the time, you know, most of the time.
Yeah, because I had another experience right before it, and I think I shared it, but I don't even remember what that was. It's like, what happened? I'm usually pretty good at remembering stuff. I leave the...
Well, let's go on. Go ahead, Kevin, and we can see what happens next.
This real side experience would begin with me in the company of two other individuals of a becoming more aware persuasion, and we would enter what seemed to be a kind of large complex of shops, all contained in one mega building. As much as houses represent the created consciousness personal self of an individual, so larger buildings represent then more the collective combined consciousness of all those we might find within them as we enter such places. And I've had a number of real-side experiences that incorporate large buildings full of the individuals that their created consciousness makes up the construction of. Buildings absent of individuals would represent ideas, but then the created consciousness is just a collection of combined ideas anyway. So we can generally say then that all buildings are idea representing in fact. My group and I had come here to seek an individual in this particular building. It's likely then that his created consciousness was very much in alignment of similar decided construction with those of the other individuals that this building represented, hence his presence here. We might even use the old reference of soul group, as surely individuals who continue to feature in each other's experiences and lifetimes, those who have no awareness of anything beyond creation, must be bound together then by the idea agreements and interwoven emotional attachments they have made. Their created consciousnesses will align, and such individuals then will feature on the real side in this represented manner, as all being in the same created consciousness representing a building, the building being whatever size is required to accommodate the particular aligned group. The individual we sought would make his presence known, very agreeable then to assist us, for we had to reach a certain destination that only he was able to find and access, for whatever reason, as though it fell within his skill set. At the moment he agreed to affording assistance, these two women suddenly appeared, wearing very little, and attempted to seduce this man. It was as though an effort to distract and draw him into his personal self more so, to stimulate his emotional, thrill-seeking astral body, and that he would decline then to lead us to where we wanted to go. These could well have been dark force individuals, or two unconscious women being used by the dark forces for such, the influence operating through it all. Nevertheless, the man stood firm in his determination to assist us, as though recognizing the attempt to claim his attention and focus, and the scene faded. Perhaps if he had been seduced and tempted by the dark forces, the experience would have ended there. We now found ourselves in a very dark and swampy area. My impression was that we were deep underground and traversing through a tunnel, our guide leading the way. The tunnel was full of creatures, dark, twisted-looking things that scuttled and slithered about, though they seemed to leave us alone, and it seemed more that they were oblivious to our presence. as though we were in their realm, but operating from a position beyond their perceptual range, a little like how the guides and other beings can move through areas and levels of creation, but unseen and unrealized, unless they choose to make themselves apparent. My impression overall was that we were in some area of the lower astral, the most forbidding of all creational levels, and so it made sense that our progress go unnoticed, to avoid unnecessary entanglements, which we would undoubtedly have were we to render ourselves perceivable. At one point we came upon a gigantic crocodile, as wide nearly as the tunnel we were passing through, and perhaps a good 100 feet long, I would have said. Maybe representing a reptilian, its size suggesting its status in the reptilian ranks, as I have seen giant crocodiles on the real side before, as representing reptilians, and the bigger they are, the more they are considered significant among the reptilians. Size can be a representation of awareness, but in certain circumstances such as this, more the self-considered perception of importance and status. But again, it was unable to see us, and we had to walk across its body and along its back to proceed, as it occupied the entire width of the tunnel. Its great crocodile head terminated around the point in the tunnel we were trying to reach, for there was a makeshift ladder that ascended, but that seemed to end abruptly, as though a portion of it had been removed. This was where our guide came in, not only for leading us to this place in the lower astral, but that he had some kind of ability to open a portal that would manifest at the top of this ladder, the ladder that seemed to go nowhere. He performed a curious ritual or ceremony, the details not making much sense when trying to recollect what it was he was doing on waking, and also there was a technology of a kind involved that formed part of his portal opening procedure. The whole process seemed a bit sporadic and temperamental. He had to repeat it several times, and then we had to be rather hasty, as the portal that formed around the point where the ladder terminated would sputter and fizz and remain for only a brief period. My two associates went through first, then our guide. Then the portal collapsed, and I was rather stuck in the tunnel. I could hear the voice of the portal maker, the faint echo of it, that perhaps I was more determining through my real awareness, as this portal evidently was a conduit to another dimensional position or realm. But after a few moments, the portal reformed, and I scrambled up the ladder to join them. I'm uncertain where we were going, or for what purpose, and this experience would end there. So just another of these real side experiences where we were traversing across creation and finding all these curious locations that require portals and the passing through ancient ruins and temples and such to reach. Generally, we are interacting with species and beings of all kinds, garnering their agreements for the galactic activities and sharing the references of the ears and the NUUU song connection, and extending the opportunity of becoming more aware, awareness being the solution to offsetting the peril of the simulator. Seems we are scouring the most remote places of creation also, and the simulator seems awash with old portals and access points, some requiring skills and key individuals to access. Dwayne the Great Writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "We're always in the process, and it's huge. A lot of preparation here. I like the confrontation too, or you get bored, and the challenge is there, because again, they put on a good show, but really there's nothing there. They've created a lot of funny things, and do the strange things that they do. But once their awareness is established with what's going on, then that supersedes everything. Eventually, we will have a tight agreement with all this, just enough, like the ship that only needs so many of the crew for it to work, then it does, to let out the sails, etc. When you have the crew, you're there, just like the football team. You have all the players on the field, and you're ready to go, and that's what we're doing."
I remember Paul Twitchell saying, freedom, the definition of freedom is to travel, being able to travel between all the dimensions and planes. Which you're doing, Kevin. You're doing the exploration, contacting beings all over the creation, and doing missions and having fun doing that, being chased by reptilians and all that. But yeah, now the freedom is like real freedom. Real love is real freedom. Dwayne has that quote, real love is real freedom. So now freedom is extended into really being in, or being, recognizing the real universes. That's what, in a way, freedom is now. So it's kind of stepped up. And then most people say freedom is like, well, freedom, yeah, freedom here in creation is freedom in the prison yard. So it's different. That kind of implied freedom is different. But yeah, that's cool. And the portals. Do you want to talk about portals again? I mean, Nikaya hasn't heard about portals. You talked about one of the previous episodes here, but creating portals or establishing them or using them. I mean, how do they work in terms of like going between dimensions and all that? You just kind of share something about that.
Well, again, I mean, really, it's all about awareness. And so with the continued recognizing and standing in the real awareness, that will supersede any sort of motion or point-to-point travel. But in the meantime, until we get to that point of real awareness where we can basically be a real awareness and isness that is everything, and therefore there is no necessity of any travelling unless we create a simulated idea of ourselves and put it in creation for whatever reasons we do. But we do need to deal with the personal side and the simulation of our consciousness and our personal selves. So we are rather limited and resigned to point travel in creation. As long as we have a personal side, we're always dealing with the simulation and motion and time and the decided ideas of time and space and cause and effect. And so what is being made more available then is then greater ability to be able to move from point to point in the simulations of creation that are not quite so restricting. And this would include, as has been shared previously, the possibility of traveling around in spaceships with the aliens, and also the possibility of be able to manifest portals or use portals that are already in existence in creation and the various dimensional life levels of it, in order to traverse from one point to another in the created simulation. And the new friends and the individuals who are on their process of awareness have had extensive portal training for a number of years. This was going back quite a few years now, but there were a whole series of real side experiences I shared where I and probably all the individuals involved with the new presentation, those that are still with us, of course, were practicing the art of and the ability of portal making. Initially, it was on the real side, and this will be more a case of us learning to stand, to put the personal side aside, so that the real awareness can go about the business of creating these portals, because obviously with the personal self, if it interjects itself, the ideas it carries can interfere with what is quite a delicate operation that involves precise portal creating. And I had a few experiences where my personal self did jump in, have a few funny notions, and then it took away from my real awareness's perfect execution of the portal. It resulted in it being misaligned, and I ended up in all sorts of funny places. But again, that may have been for a reason, just as almost for me to see another area of creation that I wouldn't have seen had I had a perfectly aligned the portal and gone where I intended to go. For example, I ended up going in some weird area of the lower astral as a result of a misaligned portal, and I had to rather then extricate myself from it. But again, that's the reason why sometimes we have these funny experiences, and sometimes they may be unsavory, because it gives us the opportunity then to become more adept at handling ourselves in such situations and learning how to extricate ourselves from what is, as everything is, that which we have created for ourselves. And so we become more responsible for our creations, and we also learn how better to deal with them if we do inadvertently position ourselves somewhere we rather hadn't. But in more recent times, on the real side experiences, it does suggest that this portal making will not just be a real side situation, but more that we have the training of the portal making will eventually manifest and express as the ability to make portals on the physical level. And Jeremy has had a number of experiences about this as well, and he actually had an experience where he saw the precise means by which he would make this portal. So from what I've seen, it seems to involve firstly the intent and the decision to do so. It also seems to involve a slight adjustment to the consciousness of the personal self vehicle that then can potentially facilitate the portal. And then it also does seem to involve some kind of manipulation of the physical that, from what I saw, involved a rather intricate series of geometrical shapes in the air using the hands, and this seemed to activate the portals. But also I've seen that a number of experiences that it may not necessarily be that the personal self needs to know how to make the portals, but more so there'll be a point where the personal self gets an impression from the real awareness that it is time to make a portal. The idea then would be for the personal self to step aside, for the individual to move into the nowness of its real awareness, and by doing so, then the real awareness can come in and take care of business almost will be doing it as an automatic process. And just as you on the real side, if you put the personal self aside, the real awareness will do everything it does that makes sense with the isness life reality that it is, and the personal self just has the experience. And that, I think, is more likely the scenario where people will have the inclination, the sense that it's time to make a portal. They will then step into the nowness, which is really a practice people should be doing anyway. But obviously, with creation, it's not always easy with the personal self and such. But and then the real awareness will, then suddenly you'll find a portal manifesting in front of you, and then you'll have the personal self intuitive inclination or real awareness discernment to then go into the portal, and it will take you where you need to go. And again, the reason for these portals, as I said, is to make a much greater ease of traveling in the simulated creation worlds, particularly as things become more dastardly on the earth and situations start to be so that demand that people need to be able to relocate very quickly. And so, I think that is all I will say in regards to that.
They never taught me that in school, but that would be a good subject. Portal making 101. Especially between like causal plane, mental plane, astral to causal or whatever. Yeah, interesting. Do you have any questions or comments, Nikaya?
Yeah.
Have you experienced any portals ever yourself?
Oh yeah, when I first started, I liked Superman comic books because you immediately left and went somewhere else. Yeah, that's one of my enjoyable thoughts. I guess we were talking about doing certain things so you don't get bored, ready to go, and you don't, sometimes the masters decide, they're getting bored, so we're going to have to create something new so they don't get bored, because we need them to keep moving on. And port yourself abroad. So let's see. Transversing several places of creation, 2 exits, real side in the process. Yeah, actually that's all pretty real for me to begin with anyway. That's the kind of thing I do anyhow. So that's interesting. I don't know where that's going to go, but I'll try it. I mean, that's kind of I was already in there, and as he was talking, I was there. I've probably been there a lot. Like I said, I've been doing this kind of thing since I was a kid. All the books that I'm attracted to are about, like, what is it? The Ship That Flew. That was a story about these 5 kids. They had a Viking ship, and at night they would jump on it, and they would just go to another realm. And every single chapter was about them leaving and going somewhere else and coming back. It's the kind of thing I liked reading about. And then, all that. Even Mary Poppins, she transported herself out of thin air into this dimension and got those kids to come with her. And they went everywhere. And I read every single one of those books. In fact, I still have those books. And then there's a book called Stargirl. I picked that up a long time ago too. She dropped out of her father's spaceship. She was sitting in a forest in Germany, and then these children came up to her and they said, "What are you doing here? Where'd you come from? And how old are you?" And she said, they said, "You look like you're 7 or 8." And she said, "I'm 87. And they said, "No, you mean 7 or 8. And she said, "No." And her parents lived to be 500 to 1,000 years old. That was just what they did. She dropped out of her father's spaceship, ended up in a forest in Germany, and these kids got together with her, and they had this fantastic experience. It's just awesome experience. So that's the kind of thing I was attracted to as a child. I was never earthbound. So you guys are helping me bring it back. I'm like, wow, what's going on here? I feel like my head's cracking open. Maybe it is.
No, glad to have you here and for you to share.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're here all the time for you. Yeah, we
I
have.
don't know where it's here.
Yeah,
Woohoo.
we have. No, our little group is always sharing stuff like this. So it's always pointing to the isness. You know, that's our adventure here. Become more aware. That's it. Awareness supersedes everything. So everything is enclosed in that. You know, everything is in awareness. In the isness, everything is there, here and now.
Nice.
Okay, so that's the show. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Nikaya.
Thanks, Val.
You. Kevin?
You.
Nikaya?
You.
Thank you.